The Pacific sun was a brutal, unforgiving god, beating down on the infamous grinder at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. This wasn't a place for the weak, the uncertain, or the soft. It was a crucible forged in sweat and pain, designed to melt away everything that wasn't a SEAL. The air was thick with the smell of salt, spent gunpowder, and the raw, earthy scent of men pushing their bodies to the absolute brink. The recruits, a new class of men, fresh from Bud S., saw themselves as the future of American warfare. They were a mix of swagger and fear, all of them hard-bodied and sharp-eyed, ready to prove they belonged. Their world was one of camouflaged, calloused hands, and the constant, barking orders of their combat instructors. It was into this hyper-masculine, unforgiving world that Lena Petrova arrived. She wasn't a combat instructor. She wasn't a SEAL. She was, as far as they could tell, just a nurse. A trauma nurse, to be precise, assigned to the medical tent for the duration of their training. The initial reactions were a mix of skepticism and dismissive politeness. She was small, quiet, with hands that seemed too delicate for this place. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her uniform was always pristine. She moved with a calm, almost serene grace that seemed utterly out of place amidst the controlled chaos of the grinder. Recruit Miller, a former college quarterback with a chip on his shoulder and a perpetually sarcastic smirk, had been the first to vocalize the general sentiment. "Looks like they sent us the camp librarian," he'd muttered to his buddy, Recruit Diaz. A quieter man who observed more than he spoke, simply shrugged. He had seen her Pachu's Navy Medical Corps, but with an unusual, faded flag insignia he didn't recognize. Still, he didn't give it much thought. To them, she was a sideline player, a necessary but ultimately irrelevant part of the background. Her role was to patch up the scrapes and sprains, to hand out painkillers, and to stay out of the way. For the first few weeks, that's exactly what she did. She treated Miller's twisted ankle with quiet efficiency, and she stitched up a gash on Recruit Johnson's arm after a clumsy obstacle course run. She worked with a silent, focused intensity that was professional but detached. The recruits saw her as a machine, a cog in the military machine, but nothing more. Their training was relentless. They ran miles in the sand with their boats on their heads, plunged into freezing ocean water, and were put through hellish scenarios designed to break them. The instructors were merciless, especially Master Chief Brennan, a hulking man with a face like a granite fist and a voice that could curdle milk. Brennan was a legend, a veteran of countless tours, and the men respected him with a fearful reverence. He was the epitome of what they wanted to become. His movements were precise, powerful, and utterly lethal. The day it happened, the grinder was alive with a different kind of energy. They were doing close-quarters combat drills, a hand-to-hand training session with Brennan at the helm. The goal was to disarm and subdue an opponent in a tight space. Brennan, as always, was the one-man wrecking crew, a whirlwind of muscle and technique. He moved with a frightening speed for a man his size, his body a living weapon. He was demonstrating a new takedown on a padded dummy. "You get inside, you break their balance, you own the fight," he roared, his voice echoing off the corrugated metal of the nearby buildings. His knuckles were white as he demonstrated a wrist lock, then transitioned into a chokehold, his arm a vice around the dummy's neck. He held it for a few seconds, then released. "Now, pair up. I want to see this done right. I want to see controlled aggression, not some backyard brawl. The recruits paired up, their muscles coiled with tension. Miller was sparring with Diaz, and Johnson was with another recruit. The thud of bodies hitting the mats, the sharp grunts of effort, and Brennan's constant corrections filled the air. Suddenly, Brennan's shout cut through the noise, sharp and different. "Johnson, control your force." Johnson, a massive man with a linebacker's build, was attempting the takedown, but in his exertion, he had put too much power into it. As he twisted, his opponent's knee slammed into his side. Johnson grunted in pain, but didn't stop, driven by the intense pressure of the moment. He swung his arm in a wide, powerful arc, trying to complete the choke. His partner slipped out of his grasp, but Johnson's momentum carried him forward. He stumbled, trying to regain his footing, but his injured knee gave out. He went down hard, landing awkwardly on his shoulder. A sharp, sickening crack echoed across the grinder. A collective gasp went through the recruits. Johnson screamed, a raw animal sound of pain. Brennan was at his side in an instant. "Johnson, what's your status?" Johnson was clutching his shoulder, his face white. Shoulder, Master Chief. "I think it's out." Brennan's face was a mask of grim determination. He knew the drill. This was a common injury. But as he knelt to assess the damage, something unexpected happened. Johnson's pain, combined with the adrenaline coursing through him, made him lash out. It was a purely reflexive, unthinking movement. His hand shot out and caught Brennan squarely on the jaw. Brennan, caught completely off guard, reeled back. He wasn't seriously hurt, but his pride was. His face, already hard, turned to stone. The recruits froze. Hitting an instructor, even by accident, was an unthinkable breach of protocol. Brennan, his eyes blazing, moved to restrain the flailing Johnson. And that's when it happened. Lena Petrova, who had been watching from the edge of the mat, had already started moving. She was no longer the quiet, serene presence they knew. Her steps were silent, her body low to the ground. As Brennan reached for Johnson, she slid between them in one fluid motion, her hand shooting out to block Brennan's arm before he could grab the panicked recruit. "Stand down, Master Chief," she said, her voice a low, steady command that cut through the chaos. It wasn't a request. Brennan, still reeling from the unexpected punch and the even more unexpected interruption, didn't register her voice. He saw her as an obstacle, a person in the way, and his reflexes took over. He reached out to push her aside. He was a veteran SEAL, a combat instructor, and she was a nurse. He didn't see a threat. That was his mistake. As his hand moved toward her, her body became a blur of motion. It was like watching a snake strike. One moment, she was standing there, a small, unassuming woman. The next, she had flowed under his outstretched arm, her hand gripping his wrist in a lock that made his eyes widen in surprise. With an effortless turn of her body, she spun him around, his own momentum working against him. Before the recruits could even fully process what they were seeing, her other arm was around Brennan's neck. Not a hard, bone-crushing choke, but a perfect, textbook-quality, rear-naked choke. Her forearm was perfectly positioned, her bicep pressing against his carotid artery. Brennan's massive frame, for all its power and years of combat training, went rigid. His eyes, full of shock and disbelief, went wide. He tried to resist, to break her hold, but her grip was like steel. The leverage was all hers. The grinder went silent. The only sound was the wind, and the ragged, shocked gasps of the recruits. They watched as Master Chief Brennan, their unshakable hero, the man who had instilled a kind of primal fear in them, went limp in the arms of the camp nurse. She held him for a moment, her knuckles white, before slowly, carefully lowering him to the mat. He wasn't unconscious. He was just ... subdued. She released the choke and knelt beside Johnson, her focus immediately shifting back to the patient. "His shoulder is dislocated," she said to the stunned recruits, her voice calm and clinical once more. "I need help to move him." Miller and Diaz, finally snapping out of their stupor, rushed to her side, their brains still trying to reconcile the image of their Master Chief being effortlessly choked out by the woman they had written off as a glorified medic. Brennan, meanwhile, sat up slowly, rubbing his neck. His face was no longer a mask of anger or pride, but of profound shock. He looked at Lena, then at the recruits, and finally back at her, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "Master Chief," Miller asked, his voice barely a whisper. Brennan shook his head, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. "I'm fine, Miller," he rasped, his voice still a little hoarse. He cleared his throat. "Johnson, don't you ever hit an instructor again, even by accident." He then turned his attention to Lena, a new light in his gaze, one of respect and awe. "Petrova ... ... Where did you learn that?" Lena, her attention entirely on Johnson's painful breathing, didn't look up. "That was just for demonstration, Master Chief. Now please, help me stabilize him." Over the next few days, the atmosphere at the camp changed completely. The recruits no longer saw Lena Petrova as just a nurse. They saw her as a mystery, a potential legend in the making. Their initial dismissive politeness had been replaced by a mixture of deep respect and a burning curiosity. They tried to ask her about it. Miller, always the boldest, was the first. "Dr. Petrova, that move was incredible. You're like a ghost. Where did you learn that?" She simply smiled, a small, knowing curve of her lips. "I've just had good instructors, Miller." Diaz, the quiet observer, watched her from a distance. He had re-examined her patch. The insignia he hadn't recognized was a stylized wolf, its head surrounded by a star. He'd done some research. It was the crest of a little-known, highly elite special operations unit in a small post-Soviet republic. A unit that, by all accounts, was composed of some of the most fearsome and highly trained combatants in the world. He kept the information to himself, realizing that her silence was intentional. Finally, after a grueling night of training, when the recruits were too exhausted to maintain any pretense, Diaz and Miller approached her as she was packing up her medical kit. "Dr. Petrova," Diaz began, his voice soft. "We need to know." She sighed, a tired, but not unkind sound. She looked at the two men, their faces streaked with dirt and exhaustion, and saw in their eyes not just curiosity, but a need to understand. To understand how someone who appeared so non-threatening could possess such lethal grace. "Sit," she said, motioning to a log outside her tent. They sat, their weary bodies collapsing with a thud. "My story is not as exciting as you might think," she started, her voice low. "I was raised in the shadow of conflict, in a country where the line between peace and war was very thin. My father was a surgeon in the military. but he was also a believer that we all have a responsibility to protect ourselves and others. He taught me things, she continued, her gaze distant, as if reliving memories. Not just first aid, but how to handle a weapon, how to fight, how to survive. He taught me that the mind is the ultimate weapon, and that the best way to win a fight is to never have to fight at all. She paused, then looked directly at them. I was a combat medic in my country's special forces. The wolf? Yes, that was our symbol. We were a small unit, but we were trained to be adaptable, to operate behind enemy lines, to be ghosts. Our mission was often to extract high-value targets, or to provide medical support in situations where a normal medic would unsurvive. So you were a soldier? Miller asked, his voice full of disbelief. I was, she confirmed. But I was always a medic first. My job was to save lives. It's a different kind of war. One where you're not trying to take something, but to preserve it. She went on to tell them about a mission that went wrong. A firefight in a derelict building. A booby trap she hadn't seen. She had been badly injured, and the mission was a failure. It had been her last. The experience had changed her. She realized she wanted to dedicate her life to healing, not to fighting. She left her old life behind, came to the United States, and dedicated herself to her career as a trauma nurse, carrying the lessons of her past with her. The chokehold you saw, she said, was not about aggression. It was about control. About using leverage and skill to subdue someone without causing permanent damage. Master Chief Brennan is a powerful man. I had to stop him before he accidentally hurt himself, or Johnson further in his attempt to regain control. The two recruits were silent, absorbing the weight of her words. The woman they had written off as soft was, in fact, a warrior who had seen more combat than any of them could imagine. She was not a sideline player, but a seasoned veteran who had chosen a different kind of service. The next day, during another training session, Brennan walked up to her. He didn't speak. He simply stood at attention, gave her a crisp, formal salute, and then walked away. It was a gesture of respect from one professional to another. A silent acknowledgement of her strength, her skill, and her unspoken past. The recruits, seeing the salute, understood. Lena Petrova wasn't just a nurse. She was a ghost from a past war. A quiet warrior who carried her skills not as a threat, but as a tool for healing. The lesson for them was simple. Never judge a book by its cover. On the grinder, where strength was measured in muscle and speed, she had shown them that true power came from a quiet, internal core of competence that was forged in a different kind of crucible. She was a part of their world now, not as an outsider, but as an earned and respected equal. A reminder that courage and strength come in many forms.